Admiral Jake Morrison stood alone on the bridge of the carrier Defiance, his eyes fixed on the massive display screen that showed Earth floating in the darkness of space. The blue planet looked peaceful from up here, with its white clouds and green continents. 8 billion people lived down there, going about their daily lives, trusting that their leaders would keep them safe. Jake wished he could share their ignorance. The tactical display showed the positions of the Allied fleet. 72 ships from the Galactic Council had arrived 3 days ago, taking up defensive positions around Earth. They were supposed to be humanity's shield against the coming storm. The Vrecken horde was approaching, a swarm of insectoid conquerors who had destroyed 12 civilizations in the past century. Their fleet numbered over 3,000 warships, each one carrying millions of soldiers bred for nothing but war and consumption. Commander Amy Lawson walked onto the bridge, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. She was a veteran of 15 years in the fleet, a woman who had faced pirates and hostile aliens without flinching. Jake had never seen her look so shaken. She handed him a datapad without speaking. Jake read the message once, then twice, refusing to believe what his eyes were telling him. The Council fleet had received orders to withdraw. All 72 ships were jumping to hyperspace within the hour, leaving Earth to face the Vrecken alone. Jake looked up at the display screen. Already, the Council ships were breaking formation, their engines glowing as they prepared to flee. He watched the flagship of Admiral Thelvan, a massive vessel called the Voice of Reason, turn away from Earth and accelerate toward the jump point. The communication officer reported an incoming transmission from the Council flagship. Jake nodded, and the face of Speaker Thelvan appeared on the main screen. He was a tall being with gray skin and 4 eyes that never seemed to blink. His species, the Thelver, had founded the Galactic Council 3,000 years ago. They considered themselves the most civilized race in the galaxy. Thelvan spoke in a calm and measured voice. He explained that the Council had conducted a strategic analysis of the current situation. The Vrecken horde was too powerful to defeat in open battle. The only way to protect the core worlds of the Council was to sacrifice the outer territories. Earth, unfortunately, fell within the sacrifice zone. Jake listened in silence as the alien continued. Thelvan expressed his regret that humanity would be lost. He noted that humans have been valuable members of the Council during their short time as a spacefaring species. Their contributions to science and culture would be remembered. But the needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few. Earth would delay the Vrecken advance long enough for the Council to prepare proper defenses around their homeworlds. The transmission ended. Jake stood motionless for a long moment, watching the Council ships disappear one by one into hyperspace. Within 20 minutes, Earth was alone. Lieutenant Ben Parker approached from the sensor station. He was young, barely 25, with a wife and newborn daughter waiting for him in Chicago. His voice cracked as he delivered his report. The Vrecken fleet would arrive in approximately 6 hours. Earth's defensive force consisted of 47 combat-ready ships. The odds of survival were calculated at less than 1%. Jake dismissed the calculation with a wave of his hand. Odds were for people who planned to give up. He ordered Amy to contact all ship commanders for an emergency conference. Then he put in a call to Geneva, where President Claire Dawson was waiting for news. The president appeared on his private screen moments later. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but her voice remained steady as Jake delivered his report. She listened without interruption, her expression growing harder with each word. When he finished, she was silent for nearly a minute. Then she spoke. She told Jake that she had always suspected the Council would abandon them when things got difficult. Humans had only been members for 30 years, barely a heartbeat in galactic terms. They had been useful for their scientific innovations and their willingness to take on dangerous missions. But they had never been equals. They had been tools, Nothing more. Jake asked for his orders. President Dawson smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. She told him to hold the line. She told him that help was coming, help that the council knew nothing about. Then she ended the transmission. In Geneva, Claire Dawson walked into the underground bunker where her cabinet had assembled. Defense Secretary Sam Mitchell was already there, along with the chiefs of staff from every branch of the military. They all knew what was happening. They all knew what needed to be done. Claire addressed them without ceremony. She announced that Protocol Omega was now in effect. The room fell silent. Protocol Omega was a legend, a rumor that had circulated through military circles for decades. Many believed it was just a myth, a story told to make soldiers feel better about their chances against superior alien technology. Sam Mitchell stood and walked to a secure terminal. He entered a code that only 3 people in the world knew. The screen lit up with a list of projects, each one classified at the highest level. These were the weapons that humanity had developed in secret, hiding them from the council inspectors who regularly toured their military facilities. Project Prometheus, an artificial singularity generator that could create miniature black holes on demand. Project Lazarus, a network of stealth satellites armed with kinetic impactors that could strike at nearly the speed of light. Project Iron Legion, an army of 2 million autonomous combat drones hidden beneath the surface of Mars. Project Titan, a new class of warship that could outrun and outgun anything in the Council fleet. The Council had forbidden most of these technologies. They claimed that such weapons were too dangerous, too destabilizing, too likely to cause unintended harm. Humanity had smiled and nodded and signed the treaties. Then they had gone home and built the weapons anyway. Claire looked at her advisors. She asked them if they were ready to show the galaxy what humans could do when their backs were against the wall. The answer was unanimous. Across the world, hidden bases began to activate. Silos that had been sealed for years opened to the sky. Factories that officially produced civilian goods switched to military production. And in orbit, Admiral Jake Morrison received a new set of orders that made him smile for the first time in hours. The Wrecken were coming to consume humanity. They expected easy prey, a young species with primitive technology and no real military experience. They had conquered 12 civilizations using the same tactics. They had never faced humans before. Jake looked at the approaching swarm of red dots on his display screen. He thought about his wife, Ellen, waiting at their home in San Diego. He thought about his son, Danny, who was just starting college. He thought about all the people on Earth who were counting on him to protect them. Then he opened a channel to the entire fleet. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke. He told his crews that the Council had abandoned them. He told them that they were facing the worst enemy the galaxy had ever known. And he told them that today was the day humanity proved its worth. The bridge crew of the Defiance stood a little straighter. Fear was still present in their eyes. But something else was there too: pride, determination, the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried humanity through countless crises throughout their history. The countdown to battle had begun. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, Dr. Kate Sullivan watched the monitors with growing excitement. She had spent 15 years of her life working on Project Prometheus, and now it was finally going to be used. The massive machine in front of her hummed with barely contained power, its core glowing with an eerie blue light that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Her assistant, a young physicist named Danny Cole, ran final diagnostics on the weapon system. Everything was working perfectly. The singularity generator was ready to create destruction on a scale that most species considered impossible. The Council had specifically banned this technology, claiming that artificial black holes were too dangerous to control. Kate had proven them wrong years ago, but she had been forced to hide her work in this underground facility, pretending that the project had been shut down. She picked up the phone and called Admiral Morrison directly. She told him that Prometheus was online and ready for deployment. The Singularity missiles could be launched within the hour. Jake thanked her and asked her one question. How many ships could each missile destroy? Kate smiled as she answered. Under optimal conditions, a single missile could consume anywhere from 30 to 50 vessels before the Singularity collapsed. The Vrecken had never seen anything like it. Nobody in the galaxy had ever used such a weapon in actual combat. Humanity would be the first. Across the Atlantic Ocean, in a bunker hidden beneath the streets of London, General Chris Howard was having a similar conversation. He stood in front of a wall of screens showing the Lazarus satellite network, a constellation of 144 weapons platforms that had been disguised as communication relays. Each satellite carried 20 tungsten rods, simple metal spears that could be accelerated to 90% of the speed of light. The Council called kinetic weapons primitive and uncivilized. They preferred energy beams and plasma cannons, sophisticated technology that could be tracked and countered. They never understood why humans had such an attachment to throwing things really hard. They were about to learn. Chris spoke to his operations team, explaining the battle plan. The Lazarus platforms would target the largest Vrecken ships first, the massive hive carriers that coordinated the enemy fleet. Each carrier held the consciousness of 1 million Vrecken soldiers, linked together in a single mind. Destroy the carriers, and those soldiers would become confused and disorganized. On Mars, Commander Ryan Ellis walked through the underground hangars where the Iron Legion waited. 2 million combat drones stood in perfect rows, their metal bodies gleaming under the artificial lights. Each drone was the size of a small car, equipped with 4 weapons and an artificial intelligence capable of making tactical decisions in microseconds. The Council feared artificial intelligence more than almost anything else. They had laws against creating machines that could think for themselves. Humanity had ignored those laws completely. The Iron Legion had been built in secret on Mars, hidden from Council inspectors who only visited Earth. Ryan activated the command network, and 2 million pairs of optical sensors lit up in the darkness. The drones were awake and ready for orders. He uploaded the tactical data about the Vrecken fleet, and the Legion began calculating attack strategies. Within seconds, they had developed 12,000 possible battle plans, each one designed to maximize enemy casualties while minimizing human losses. Back on the Defiance, Admiral Morrison received updates from all 3 secret projects. He also received word that 6 additional battleships were emerging from hidden construction facilities on the Moon. These were Titan-class vessels, twice the size of anything in the Council fleet, armed with weapons that the aliens had never imagined. His tactical advisor, an AI system called Noah, processed all the incoming data and projected new survival odds. The numbers had improved dramatically, from less than 1% to approximately 43%. Still not great odds, but far better than anyone had expected. Amy Lawson stood beside him, reviewing the fleet positions. She noted that the Vrecken advance scouts would arrive in about 4 hours, well ahead of the main fleet. These scouts were smaller vessels, each one the size of a small moon, sent ahead to gather intelligence and soften up enemy defenses. Jake decided to give the scouts a warm welcome. He ordered Lieutenant Commander Meg Torres to prepare her fighter squadron for immediate launch. Meg was the best pilot in the fleet, a woman who had been flying since she was 16 and had never lost a dogfight. Her squadron consisted of 60 of the most skilled pilots. Humanity had to offer. Meg gathered her pilots in the ready room of the carrier Resilience. She looked at their faces, seeing fear and determination in equal measure. She told them that today they would make history. Today, they would show the galaxy that humans did not know how to surrender. One of her pilots, a young man named Luke Perry, asked what their objective was. Meg smiled and told him it was simple. They were going to kill as many Wrecken scouts as possible before the main fleet arrived. They were going to make the enemy afraid before the real battle even started. The pilots rushed to their fighters, climbing into cockpits and running through pre-flight checklists. Within 15 minutes, 60 fighters launched from the Resilience, forming up an attack formation as they headed toward the approaching Wrecken scouts. On Earth, civilians were being moved to underground shelters in every major city. The governments had not told them the full truth about the situation, only that there was a potential threat and that precautions were necessary. Most people went along quietly, trusting that their leaders had things under control. President Dawson addressed the world from her bunker in Geneva. She spoke calmly about the temporary emergency measures being implemented. She assured people that the military was prepared for any situation. She did not mention that the Council had abandoned them. She did not mention that 3,000 enemy ships were approaching. She did not mention that humanity was about to fight the most important battle in its history. Behind her, Defense Secretary Mitchell coordinated the activation of ground-based defenses. Anti-orbital cannons emerged from mountains and deserts and ocean platforms. Missile batteries loaded their payloads. Shield generators powered up around major population centers. Earth was becoming a fortress dot in the depths of space. The first Wrecken scouts dropped out of hyperspace. Their sensors immediately detected the human fleet waiting for them. The scouts transmitted data back to the main fleet, describing the small number of enemy vessels and their primitive technology. The Wrecken Supreme, the collective intelligence that controlled the entire horde, calculated that the coming battle would be over in less than an hour. The Supreme had made this calculation many times before. 12 civilizations had fallen to the Wrecken, each one believing that they could resist the horde. Each one had been wrong. The Supreme saw no reason why humans would be any different. Meg Torres watched the scouts approach on her fighter's display screen. They were massive, ugly vessels covered in spines and weapons ports. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. She was leading 60 fighters against 100 of these monsters. She opened a channel to her squadron. Her voice was steady as she spoke. She told them to remember their training. She told them to watch each other's backs. She told them to make every shot count. Then she pushed her throttle forward and led her pilots into battle. The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness of space. Wrecken weapons lashed out at the approaching fighters, green energy beams that could vaporize metal in an instant. The human pilots dodged and weaved, using their smaller size and greater maneuverability to avoid the deadly strikes. Meg locked onto the nearest scout ship and fired her entire missile payload. 8 warheads slammed into the enemy vessel, punching through its hull and detonating inside. The scout exploded in a ball of green fire, and across the fleet, humanity cheered. The Battle of Earth had begun. The battle against the Wrecken scouts lasted for 3 hours. Meg Torres lost 12 pilots in that time, 12 brave men and women who gave their lives to protect their homeworld. But the scouts lost far more. When the last enemy vessel exploded, 73 of the original 100 scouts had been destroyed. The remaining 27 fled back to the main fleet, carrying tales of human ferocity that the Wrecken Supreme did not want to believe. Admiral Jake Morrison watched the retreating scouts on his display screen. He knew this was only the beginning. The main fleet would arrive soon, and they would not be so easy to defeat. 3,000 warships against humanity's 53 remaining vessels. The math was still terrible. He ordered the fleet to form a defensive sphere around Earth, each ship positioned to cover the gaps left by its neighbors. Military experts across the galaxy considered this formation suicidal. It meant that every ship would be surrounded by enemies, with no room to retreat. Jake was counting on that. Retreat was not part of his vocabulary today, Commander. Amy Lawson reported that the main Wrecken fleet had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. They were coming in slowly, cautiously, clearly surprised by the resistance their scouts had encountered. The Supreme was recalculating its strategy. Jake used that hesitation. He contacted General Howard in London and authorized the first Lazarus strike. Across the solar system, stealth satellites powered up their weapons. Targeting computers locked onto the largest Wrecken carriers, the massive hive ships that served as command centers for the enemy fleet. The first rod launched at 0347 hours. Greenwich Mean Time. It was a simple tungsten cylinder, 2 meters long and 30 centimeters wide, containing no explosives or warheads of any kind. It accelerated to 92% of the speed of light within seconds, becoming a blur that no sensor could track. The rod struck a Wrecken hive carrier at the center of their formation. At that velocity, the simple metal spear released more energy than a nuclear bomb. The carrier simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant, along with the 3 million Wrecken mines it contained. The enemy fleet stopped moving. They had never seen a weapon like this. They could not understand how it worked or how to defend against it. While they hesitated, 43 more rods launched from the Lazarus satellites, each one finding its target with perfect precision. On the Defiance, Lieutenant Ben Parker reported the results with growing excitement. 44 carriers destroyed in the first strike. The Wrecken fleet was in chaos, ships scattering in all directions as they tried to avoid the invisible death raining down from the stars. But the Wrecken Supreme was not defeated yet. The collective intelligence adapted quickly, spreading its consciousness across thousands of smaller vessels instead of concentrating in the carriers. The Horde reformed its formation and resumed its advance, slower now, but still relentless. Jake had expected this. He contacted Dr. Sullivan in Nevada and gave her the authorization she had been waiting for. Deep underground, Kate pressed the launch button for Project Prometheus. A single missile rose from the desert on a pillar of fire, climbing through the atmosphere and heading toward the heart of the Wrecken fleet. The missile was small, barely 5 meters long, and it carried no conventional warhead. Instead, it contained a device that bent the laws of physics, creating a point of infinite density that pulled everything toward itself. When the missile reached the center of the enemy formation, Kate activated the singularity for exactly 2.7 seconds. A black hole existed in the space between Earth and Mars. It was tiny, smaller than a grain of sand, but its gravitational pull was immense. 47 Wrecken warships were caught in its embrace, crushed into nothing before they could even react. Then the singularity collapsed, releasing a burst of energy that damaged dozens more vessels. The Wrecken Supreme experienced something it had never felt before: fear. This young species, these primitive humans who had only been traveling the stars for a few decades, possessed weapons that defied comprehension. The Supreme had consumed 12 civilizations, and none of them had ever created anything like this. But the Supreme was not programmed to retreat. The Horde existed to consume, and Earth was its next meal. The fleet resumed its advance, accepting losses that would have broken any other military force. On the Defiance, Admiral Morrison watched the enemy come. He had hoped the Prometheus strike would break their morale, but the Wrecken were too alien to think like humans. They did not fear death because they did not truly understand it. Each individual Wrecken was just a cell in the larger body of the Horde, expendable and replaceable. He ordered the human fleet to engage. 53 ships against nearly 2,800 remaining enemies. The formation held as they opened fire, their weapons tearing into the advancing wall of Wrecken vessels. Meg Torres led her surviving pilots back into the fight. She had lost 23 of her original 60, but the remaining 37 were more determined than ever. They dove into the enemy formation, targeting weapons ports and engine clusters. disabling ships so that the larger vessels could finish them off. The Titan-class battleships from the lunar shipyards arrived in the middle of the battle. 6 massive vessels, each one bristling with weapons that the Council had never seen. They tore through the Wrecken flanks, their heavy cannons destroying enemy ships with every volley. On Earth, the ground defenses activated as Wrecken landing craft tried to break through to the surface. Anti-orbital cannons fired streams of plasma into the sky, vaporizing transports before they could deploy their troops. Shield generators protected the major cities, deflecting the debris that rained down from the battle above. President Dawson watched the battle from her bunker, her face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays. Defense Secretary Mitchell stood beside her, calling out updates as they arrived. The losses were heavy, but humanity was holding. More than that, they were winning. At the 12-hour mark, the Iron Legion arrived from Mars. 2 million combat drones poured out of cargo ships, each one seeking its own target among the Wrecken fleet. The drones were fearless and precise, sacrificing themselves without hesitation to destroy enemy vessels. Commander Ryan Ellis coordinated the Legion from his command center on Mars. He watched as his creations tore through the enemy formation, their artificial lines calculating optimal attack patterns faster than any organic being could follow. The Wrecken tried to adapt, but they could not match the speed and coordination of the machine army. By the 18th hour, the tide had turned completely. The Wrecken fleet had been reduced to less than 800 vessels, and they were surrounded on all sides. The Supreme finally accepted what its calculations had been telling it for hours. This battle was lost. The remaining Wrecken ships began to withdraw, jumping to hyperspace in desperate attempts to escape. Humanity let most of them go. The point had been made. The message had been sent. Admiral Morrison received reports from across the fleet. They had lost 23 ships and over 6,000 sailors. It was a heavy price, but it was far less than anyone had expected. And in return, they had destroyed more than 2,000 Wrecken warships. Amy Lawson stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. She asked him if it was really over. Jake shook his head slowly. The battle was over, he told her. But the war was just beginning. On Earth, people emerged from their shelters and looked up at the sky. They could see the flashes of light from the departing Wrecken ships, bright sparks against the darkness of space. They did not fully understand what had happened, but they knew one thing for certain. They had survived. President Dawson addressed the world again, this time with the truth. She told them about the Council's betrayal. She told them about the secret weapons that had saved their lives. And she told them that humanity would never again trust its fate to alien promises. The cheering lasted for hours. The days following the Battle of Earth were filled with mourning and celebration in equal measure. Memorial services were held for the 6,000 sailors who had given their lives defending their homeworld. Their names were carved into a massive monument built in Geneva, a towering pillar of black granite that could be seen from miles away. But even as humanity grieved, they were also preparing. Admiral Jake Morrison spent long hours in meetings with President Dawson and her cabinet, planning the next phase of their response. The Council had betrayed them. That betrayal could not go unanswered. Reports from across the galaxy confirmed what they had suspected. The Council races were in shock. They had expected Earth to fall within hours, a minor tragedy that would buy them time to prepare their own defenses. Instead, humanity had crushed the Wrecken Horde, the most feared military force in known space. The 12 civilizations that the Wrecken had destroyed were avenged by a species that the Council had dismissed as primitive and expendable. Commander Amy Lawson oversaw the repair and reconstruction of the fleet. The hidden shipyards on the moon worked around the clock, producing new vessels at a pace that would have seemed impossible a few months ago. Humanity was not just rebuilding. They were expanding. By the end of the first week, they had 60 ships ready for action. By the end of the second week, they had 90. On Mars, Commander Ryan Ellis upgraded the Iron Legion with new weapons and better armor. The drones had performed brilliantly in the battle, but they could be improved. Ellis worked with the AI systems that controlled the Legion, refining their tactical algorithms and teaching them new strategies. The machines learned quickly, as machines always do. Dr. Kate Sullivan continued her research on Project Prometheus, developing smaller and more efficient singularity weapons. She also began work on new projects, devices that pushed the boundaries of physics in ways that would terrify the Council if they knew about them. Humanity had stopped pretending to follow the rules. They would never be caught unprepared again. 2 weeks after the battle, President Dawson called a special session of the World Assembly. Leaders from every nation attended, either in person or by video link. The president stood at the podium and outlined her plan for humanity's future. She proposed the formation of a new government, a human confederacy that would unite all nations under a single banner for matters of defense and foreign relations. Each nation would keep its own laws and customs, but they would speak with one voice when dealing with alien species. The vote was unanimous. The Confederacy was born. Admiral Morrison was named Supreme Commander of the Confederate Fleet. It was a title he had not wanted, but he accepted it because he understood what was at stake. Humanity needed a leader who could deal with the threats that were coming. The Vrekin would return eventually, hungry for revenge. And the Council would not sit idle while humanity grew stronger. Intelligence reports suggested that Speaker Thelvan was already working to turn other races against Earth. He was telling them that humans were dangerous, unpredictable, a threat to galactic stability. Some believed him. Others were not so sure. They had seen what humanity could do when provoked, and they were not eager to become the next target. 3 weeks after the battle, Jake received word that a small Vrekin fleet had been spotted near the colony on Alpha Centauri. They were not attacking, just watching, clearly gathering information for a future assault. Jake did not wait for them to make the first move. He took a squadron of 12 ships and jumped to Alpha Centauri. The Vrekin scouts fled as soon as they detected his approach. They were faster than his ships, disappearing into hyperspace before he could get within weapons range. But he had sent a message. Humanity would not wait to be attacked. They would hunt down their enemies wherever they tried to hide. On the Council homeworld of Thelva Prime, Speaker Thelvan watched the reports with growing concern. His plan to sacrifice Earth had backfired completely. Instead of weakening humanity, he had united them and revealed the full extent of their military capabilities. Now they were building a fleet that could challenge the entire Council. His advisors urged caution. They suggested offering peace to humanity, perhaps even inviting them back into the Council with greater status and privileges. Thelvan rejected these suggestions angrily. He insisted that humans were animals, barely civilized creatures who had gotten lucky in a single battle. They would eventually destroy themselves, as all violent species did. But secretly, he was afraid. He had seen the recordings of the Battle of Earth. He had watched human pilots flying into certain death without hesitation. He had seen the black hole consume nearly 50 of his most powerful warships. He had witnessed the Iron Legion tearing through the Vrekin formation with mechanical precision. And he knew that humanity was only getting started. President Dawson sent a formal communication to the Council, demanding a full apology for the betrayal and immediate reparations for the losses humanity had suffered. The Council refused to even acknowledge the message. They pretended that nothing had happened, that the Vrekin attack had been an unexpected tragedy that no one could have prevented. Jake Morrison was not surprised by this response. He had never expected the Council to admit their guilt, but he wanted the refusal on record. He wanted evidence that humanity had tried to resolve the situation peacefully. Because what came next would not be peaceful at all. The Confederate fleet continued to grow. 100 ships became 120. The Iron Legion expanded to 3 million drones. New Prometheus missiles were stockpiled in hidden bunkers across the solar system. The Lazarus satellites were upgraded with more powerful accelerators. Humanity was preparing for war. Meg. Torres was promoted to full commander and given her own carrier, a Spirit of Chicago. She recruited the best pilots from across the Confederacy, training them in the tactics that had proven so effective against the Wrecken. Her new squadron was called the Reapers, and they quickly earned a reputation as the deadliest fighter unit in human space. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal. People went back to work, children went back to school, and the world kept turning. But something had changed. Humanity looked at the stars differently now. They had faced extinction and survived. They had been betrayed by those they trusted and had triumphed anyway. They were no longer afraid of the galaxy. The galaxy was afraid of them. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, looking at the tactical display that showed the positions of known alien fleets throughout the region. The Council had over 400 warships spread across their various member worlds. They thought those ships made them safe. They were wrong. Jake turned to Amy Lawson, who had become his most trusted advisor. He told her to start planning the expedition to Thelva Prime. It was time to deliver humanity's response in person. Amy nodded and began issuing orders. The fleet would depart in 1 week. 120 ships, 3 million drones, and enough firepower to devastate an entire star system. The Council had called humanity expendable. They had left 8 billion people to die without a second thought. Now, they would learn the price of that decision. Jake looked out at the stars, his expression hard as stone. The betrayers were about to face justice, and humanity would deliver it. The human Confederate fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 120 warships arranged in an arrowhead pattern that pointed directly at Thelva Prime. Behind them came the transport vessels carrying the Iron Legion. 3 million drones ready to deploy at a moment's notice. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. And it had come to deliver a message. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the Council homeworld grow larger on his display screen. It was a beautiful planet, with purple oceans and silver forests that sparkled under the light of twin suns. Billions of Thelver lived there, going about their daily lives, trusting that their leaders would keep them safe. Jake knew how that felt. The Council Defense Fleet moved to intercept them. 400 ships from a dozen different species, all flying under the banner of the Galactic Council. They outnumbered the human fleet by more than 3 to 1. Their commanders believed this gave them an advantage. Jake opened a channel to the Council flagship and was immediately connected to Speaker Talvan. The alien's face appeared on the main screen, his 4 eyes narrowing with anger and barely concealed fear. He demanded to know the meaning of this unprovoked aggression. He called it a violation of galactic law and an act of war. Jake did not respond to the accusations. Instead, he began to speak in a calm and measured voice that was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every species in the galaxy could hear his words. He told the story of the Battle of Earth, starting with the Council's promise to defend humanity against the Wrecken Horde. He described the moment when the Council fleet had abandoned their positions, leaving Earth to face 3,000 enemy warships alone. He recounted the cold message from Thelvan, explaining that humanity had been sacrificed for strategic purposes. He spoke of the terror that had gripped 8 billion people when they learned that they had been betrayed by those they trusted. Then he told them about the battle itself. He described the bravery of pilots like Meg Torres, who had led her squadron into the teeth of the Wrecken formation knowing that most of them would not return. He named the captains who had died defending their ships, the sailors who had stayed at their posts until the very end, the ordinary people who had become heroes in humanity's darkest hour. He listed the names of the fallen, all 6,000 of them. It took nearly 20 minutes to read the entire list, and Jake spoke each name clearly, ensuring that the galaxy would remember those who had given everything. When he finished, the communication channels were silent. No one knew what to say. The evidence of the Council's betrayal was now public, broadcast to every corner of known space. Thelvan's carefully constructed story about an unexpected tragedy had been exposed as the lie it always was. Jake continued speaking. He announced that humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. They would establish their own territory, their own alliances, their own rules. Any species that wanted peaceful relations with Earth was welcome to negotiate. Any species that threatened humanity or her colonies would face consequences. Thelvan finally found his voice. He sneered at Jake's words, calling them the empty threats of a young and foolish race. He pointed out that the Council had 400 ships surrounding the human fleet. He suggested that perhaps humanity should learn some humility before making demands. Jake smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. He turned to Amy Lawson and gave a single order. One Lazarus rod launched from a stealth satellite hidden among the human formation. It struck an uninhabited moon in the Thelva system, a small rocky body that had orbited the homeworld for millions of years. The moon shattered like glass, breaking into a billion fragments that began to spread across the sky. The debris would orbit Thelva Prime forever, a permanent reminder of human capability. Every night, the Thelver would look up and see the remains of their moon glittering in the darkness. They would remember what humanity could do to their world if they chose. Thelvan stared at his display screen in horror. The destruction of the moon was a demonstration, nothing more, but the message was clear. If humanity wanted to destroy Thelva Prime itself, they could do so at any time. The 400 Council ships were meaningless against weapons that moved at nearly the speed of light. Jake asked Thelvan if he understood the situation now. The speaker said nothing, his gray face turning pale with shock and fear. Jake took his silence as agreement. He made one final announcement. Humanity was not seeking war with the Council. They had no desire to conquer or destroy other species. They simply wanted to be left alone to determine their own destiny. But if anyone tried to betray them again, if anyone tried to use them as sacrificial pawns in their political games, they should remember one simple piece of advice. The human fleet turned and jumped to hyperspace, disappearing as quickly as they had arrived. The Council Defense Fleet remained in position, their commanders too stunned to react. They had expected a battle, perhaps even a desperate last stand by the outmatched humans. They had not expected to be reminded of their own powerlessness. On Thelva Prime, Speaker Thelvan retreated to his private chambers and refused to see anyone for 3 days. When he finally emerged, he looked older and more tired than anyone had ever seen him. He announced that the Council would not pursue hostilities against humanity. He called it a gesture of goodwill and understanding. Everyone knew it was really fear. Back on Earth, President Dawson signed the Sovereignty Declaration in front of cameras from every nation. Ambassador Lisa Grant delivered copies to every known species, along with formal offers of trade and alliance. Many accepted. They had seen how the Council treated its members, and they wanted no part of that arrangement. Humanity offered something different. Honest partnership between equals. The human confederacy grew rapidly over the following years. Species that the Council had ignored or exploited came to Earth seeking protection and friendship. Trade routes flourished. Colonies expanded. The name of humanity became synonymous with strength, honor, and the unwillingness to abandon allies. Admiral Jake Morrison retired 5 years after the Battle of Earth, passing command of the fleet to Amy Lawson. He bought a small farm in Montana and spent his days growing vegetables and playing with his grandchildren. But he kept his uniform in the closet, ready to be worn again if his people ever needed him. Commander Meg Torres became a legend, her name taught in military academies across the Confederacy. She continued flying until she was 50, then took over as head of pilot training at the academy in Colorado. Every new recruit learned the story of how she had led 60 fighters against 100 Vrecken scouts and one Dr. Kate Sullivan received the highest scientific honors humanity could bestow. But she continued working in her underground lab, always developing new technologies that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. She said she would retire when she ran out of ideas. No one expected that to happen anytime soon. The Vrecken horde never returned to human space. The survivors of the Battle of Earth had spread the word throughout their species. Humans were not prey. They were predators, and anyone who tried to consume them would be consumed instead. The few Vrecken who remained kept their distance, fading into the outer reaches of the galaxy where humanity had no interest in following. And on Thelva Prime, the shattered moon continued its endless orbit, its fragments catching the light of the twin suns like a field of broken glass. The council met in its shadow, reminded every day of the species they had underestimated. They had called humanity weak. They had called humanity expendable. They had tried to sacrifice 8 billion lives to buy themselves a few more months of safety. They had been wrong. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about the difference between a peaceful species and a harmless one. Humanity wanted peace. They sought friendship and cooperation with all who offered it honestly. But they were not harmless. They would never be harmless again. Anyone who forgot that lesson only had to look up at the night sky of Thelva Prime to be reminded. The fragments of the shattered moon twinkled in the darkness, beautiful and terrifying, a warning written across the stars in letters that would never fade. Remember us. Respect us. Or run. Humanity had spoken. The galaxy had listened.